Hi, Melanie Gregg here, Huntington Beach, California, and I am trying something new. I am a visual artist, I'm a mother. I'm also a student at Goddard College, special little liberal arts school back in Vermont, and I am going to attempt to do a new type of visual journaling for some of my schoolwork. So um, I have long kept visual journals, so that usually is a collection of scribbles, doodles, paintings, uh, writing, just basically anything that comes out of me without any filtering. And so this will be a new type of visual journal. I'm trying to, I guess, get out some of my experiences and my learnings in a way that is less stressful and more natural for me, and that kind of pleases my senses as a creative type. So, um, I've got a very open, encouraging, creative professor that has encouraged me to kind of drop my prior academic traumas and yes, I'll still have to write 30-page research papers, but intermittently I can maybe record some of what I'm learning and working through in different ways. So I thought that maybe this would be a way. Um, and I didn't really know where to start. I kind of was dreading it all day, but um, then I just was like, screw it, like just start. It doesn't really matter. So I thought I'm gonna go out and paint in a little while, and I'll do some time lapses and recordings of that. But I just thought initially. Really more for myself to get comfortable talking in front of the camera, and also so that whatever that people who don't know a lot about me can get to know me also and talk to you guys a little bit first. So um, I'll just start with I had a really interesting conversation with my cousin today. So he's also like one of my best friends. We work together. We've grown up together. He's a few years older than me. And he said today that it's taken him almost our entire lives to start to understand me, that even though we've been so close, he said I'm a hard one to figure out. um, and I asked him kind of more about that, and he said, well, you can be really expressive sometimes, but then a lot of the times you're real quiet, you're not very expressive, you kind of will show up in our lives for periods of time, then you pull away and you're not very communicative. And it's not the first time I've heard this from somebody, and so I just let him share what his experience of that was, um, and then just let him know that if he could imagine it, that I kind of, while I often feel like I'm in a world that communicates very differently for me, like we have a whole different language. So most of the time when I'm running a household and working and going to school and interacting with people around me, that I have to speak a language that's not native to me, meaning just English, like verbal language. So I can do it. I've had to use kind of my verbal and written skills a lot in work. I've been in kind of education and software and management for work most of my life. Um, but that really what I'm most comfortable doing is communicating and speaking through the language of art or just some sort of creative expression. And so when I go out in the world and engage with people, um, it's it takes a lot of energy for me versus I can produce mass amounts of art and be by myself a whole lot, and that feels very comfortable. And he was really intrigued by that, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, well, instead from now on, draw me a picture and just text it to me or something. You don't need to not respond." And but anyways, it was interesting, and it got me kind of thinking a lot about. I had been doing daily meditations, and I'm not like a hyper spiritual person in the sense that I think a lot of people experience or practice spirituality or religion. But I've always really considered like nature is my church, and creativity is my religion. And so that is when I experience most of my kind of spiritual enlightenment, spiritual peace, or whatever you want to call it, like where sometimes things are happening on a more visceral or existential level, and you don't really necessarily understand it. There definitely is an element of faith that goes along with that. Um, and after I was done talking to my cousin today, um, I thought about, reflected back to a Brazilian artist that I really like. Her name is Sylvia Martins, and she's an abstractionist also. I primarily work with an abstraction in multiple mediums, but I relate to her on a few levels, and one of them is that we both used to do more kind of representational and figurative work, and kind of our work evolves, and there's feedback from people that are like, oh, your style has changed, or I don't know, like people always questioning, which I think is a different conversation and interesting, but um, and how we as artists are like, well, of course our work's going to evolve and change, because as people we evolve and change, and our experiences evolve and change, and our work is an expression of us and from wherever we're at. So like you can look back at my work, and this is true I think of a lot of visual artists. You can look back at my work, and even if I didn't realize it at the time that it reflected what was going on in my life, you certainly can see it as kind of a visual diary of events. And I can look back at harder times in my life and it reflects that. More kind of carefree times in my work reflects that. Even more specific, like things that I've gone through, and that comes out in my work. Even if it's not intentional, and that's, I guess, one of the other points, and something that I'm really exploring this semester, is this whole, and what abstraction allows you to do is truly work from a visceral place. So just because there's not, I guess, an intended or conscious message, does that still come through? Is there still a message that comes from within, and is that readable, or maybe not even consciously readable, but can people feel that? Is that visceral response the same for a viewer as it can be for the artist who's putting it out there? And Sylvia Martins, she also like talks a lot about her experience of like kind of her ritual of going into the studio or getting into the mode of her practice, and her little ritual, right? So mine is like I turn on some sort of music. It can have lyrics, often it doesn't. Sometimes it's more like tribal or Pacific Islander instrumentals, and I light incense, and I light a candle, and I try to like clear the space in my mind so that I've got whatever, like the space within myself to dive in. And she also talks about it being kind of a spiritual act, that like when you look at a blank canvas, and especially if you're working as a kind of more instinctual abstractionist, that there you go through this period of contemplation, right, and reflection, and you have to just kind of insert yourself in the process, that in a faith-based manner, like I don't know, like let's see, I gotta trust the process and see what evolves, and then respond to that, and be comfortable with the layers that happen while you're working, and without judging yourself or the work. And that's hard. It goes against our obsession of production in this culture. But another thing that I got from this Brazilian artist, Sylvia Martins, was that she keeps in her studio this de Kooning quote, which I don't actually have like written in my studio space, but I always have it in my mind. And she said, "I am all here now." Well, that's what de Kooning said, that she holds closely, and now that I hold closely, I am all here now. And that is kind of, that came up today for me because after the conversation with my cousin that said, like, sometimes it's like hard to stay connected to you. And I thought that's really interesting because, but I told him, I said, you guys all feel, everybody out in my life feels like I pull away to go in the studio. But the truth is my studio practice, my art practice is where I am most home. That is my comfort zone. That is what feels natural to me. So it's more when I come out and connect in the world with everybody else, that's when I'm stepping out. That's when I'm pulling away from my kind of creative practice. And so I thought about that. I was like, it's true. Like when nobody can really know me or stay fully engaged or connected without being aware of my creative practice, without being inserted in that on some level. And that is truly when I'm making art, on whatever level. I worked as a photographer for almost 20 years, and I'm a painter and a printmaker. But that is when I am all there, because without that creative component, only part of me will ever be present, and that's not sustainable for very long. So these have been kind of interesting excavations the last couple of weeks, and I love that. I love those excavations, and certainly when I go into the studio, I usually anticipate more of those. That within my work, whatever I find answers, or sometimes I just find more questions. But that's fun. That's where most of my learning takes place. So it's interesting to be back in school and kind of, I don't know, I mean, on some level be pressed to be more intellectual than I naturally would be. I mean, I'm always critical, like in my thinking and stuff, and in my how I respond to things and think about things, but I don't always like do this, like have this kind of very specific intellectual trade or sharing or whatever. So I just thought that maybe mixing up the mediums that I share in, visually and in written word, and this way that it might alleviate some of the academic pressure, and also challenge me in the right way. So that's that. I'm off to the studio. That was a lot.